Hi everybody, it's Carrie Williams, and in this video I want to talk about driving question boards. So first of all, a driving question board is an instructional strategy that is used to display student questions they have about the phenomenon or the design problem that's been introduced at the beginning of a unit. And then you progressively answer those questions to display what you figured out. You also use the driving question board to help you navigate from lesson to lesson. So it helps you drive the learning to say, hey, we've got all these questions. What should we investigate first? And so it helps you kind of point towards and guide students to the topics that you think they should go next, but you let them think that it's them driving the learning. Because really, honestly, what they choose is generally what is the makes the logical sense that you would choose as well. So don't be scared about collecting student questions, because honestly, we really do solve all of them. And there's going to be a few outliers, and that's okay. We put those in what's called the parking lot, and we can address those later. So first of all, let me show you what a driving question board looks like. A driving question board, this is an example, in a classroom is basically, it can be a bulletin board. It can also be done digitally, which I'll talk about that in a moment. But you can see the sticky notes are all different student questions that they've asked in class. And there's a couple ways to collect questions I'm going to talk about in the next slide. You'll also notice that there's some evidence of learning. There's also some pictures of the phenomenon in the center of the board. So there's a model. There's a picture of what the phenomenon they're studying. And you can also see that there's topics that kind of categorize the questions. Over in the left corner, there's questions about light. In the center, there are questions about reflection. On the right, there are questions about the one-way mirror. This comes from the sixth grade unit on Light 6.1 from Open Syed. And I will introduce the teacher at the end of this presentation of who made all these wonderful driving question boards. And you need to follow her on Twitter. Her name is Gretchen Brinsa, but we'll talk about her in the end. Okay, so there's many different ways you can collect questions from students. Traditionally, a driving question board is a poster on the wall, and you use sticky notes, and the questions are posted as I just showed you in the last picture. But there are digital options. You can use a Google Doc and make it collaborative or share it so that multiple people can type on it. You can collect them using a Google form and then collect all the questions in the Google Sheet that are the responses to the Google form. You can actually just make a Google Sheet collaborative, and that's a strategy that I've used before with the QFT, the question formulation technique. I'll talk about that in a moment. Or you can use Jamboard. Now, some teachers find these digital strategies to be problematic when they are shared, because you can have students typing things that they shouldn't be typing, or it's a little bit hard to manage when you have shared documents. So I have heard of a strategy where a teacher either types while people are talking, or you have one or two really fast typers that will type on the document for you when students are sharing out their questions. So leverage your good typers in your class, and they can create the list for you, or you can type it yourself. You can also just use paper, lined paper, and then you collect that paper at the end and then transfer them to sticky notes if you're making a poster. So obviously you're going to find your own style for this, but these are some ways to collect student questions. So I want to talk a little bit more real quick about the question formulation technique, otherwise known as QFT. It comes from the Right Question Institute. And so check out their Google, the Right Question Institute. They've got a ton of resources to facilitate this. This is really helpful when your students are not good at asking questions. And they're really good when they're young at asking questions, but they lose that ability, it seems, in middle school and high school unless we practice it. So the question formulation technique I have them go into groups, and you can see the tabs at the bottom of this Google Sheet are color coded. So I'll have group one all be on sheet one and group two on sheet two, and they collaboratively write as many questions as they can in the first column, and they just brainstorm as many questions after you have introduced a phenomenon. So this one was with the tardigrades. I'm probably saying that wrong, but they went to space, they went out and were exposed to UV radiation, they came back to Earth, and they reproduced. So the only animal we've ever known, or not animal, insect, that has been known to do this. So that was the phenomenon. So I had people ask questions, And then they classify those questions as open or closed. So we're really trying to get students to understand that yes or no questions we can answer right away. But we want to learn how to ask and write open-ended questions. So then you can have them take some of those closed questions and make them open. And then we have them prioritize the top 3. And then those are the questions that go on the driving question board. So if you have a lot of students in a class or you have multiple class periods, this is a way to reduce the number of questions on the driving question board, especially because you don't allow repeats. So as the students share out their question, if it's one they've prioritized, they go to their next prioritized question when it's their group's turn to share a question. So that helps kind of manage the question sharing a little bit. And then you have a reference of all of the questions and have supported and developed their ability to ask questions using the question formulation technique. I'd say this is probably a little bit easier in middle school and high school. I would stick to the sticky notes in elementary. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about creating topics or groupings for the sticky notes or the questions. So this can obviously be done by the teacher, but it works even better to have the students help come up with these topics that they're seeing patterns in within the questions. And so one way to do this is to have students write their question on a sticky note, and then as they come up, they put it on a portion of the board, and there's no topic yet, and they put it on an area of the board. And then you ask, does anybody have a related question to this? And so anybody who has a related question will then come up and put their question on the board, one at a time, of course. And so then you get a grouping of related questions, even though we haven't decided on a topic yet. Then we can go to the next group. Okay, let's go to another a question out there that's unrelated. And we make another grouping or another area. And then anybody with a related question. So now we have 2 groups on the driving question board. And then at the end, we read through some of the questions and we come up with the topics that will represent really what those questions are about. Now, those topics are what you're going to use to help you drive your lessons, because we can say, well, what should we learn about or what should we investigate first here? And they're like, well, looks like we probably should investigate tectonic plates first. And you really can get good at guiding them towards the topic you want, because you know what lesson you want to do first. And then some very advanced teachers might even mix up their lessons according to which topic students want to go into first. Obviously, it's going to be common sense that you're going to probably want to learn about tectonic plates before you go into earthquakes, or before you go into, there's probably a logical sequence to make it coherent in your storyline, but you can really help guide students to which topic sounds like a good idea to go next. You'd be surprised, these students generally pick the same order that you pick. They think it's magic, and I think that I'm just finally confident in using driving question boards now. So if you look at the OpenSciEd instructional routine for the storyline model, and this would be the same for any NGSS curriculum that uses the storyline approach, but OpenSciEd has really created routines that leverage the driving question board. And so you have an anchoring phenomenon routine where you have a shared experience, you show a video, you all do an investigation, there's something that you anchor the unit on, and then you're going to ask those questions and create that driving question board. And that driving question board is going to be leveraged throughout the storyline to go back and say, okay, let's figure out what we've learned. Let's put that on the board. And now, what do we still need to learn? What questions do we still have unanswered? So it helps drive the learning to the next set of questions. And so that would be a navigation routine. Then you would do another investigation. And then you say, okay, we figured all this out. Let's build our understanding of what we just figured out in our investigation. Let's put our new learnings on the driving question board. And now, okay, what do we still have left to figure out? Well, we've got this whole set of questions over here on whatever the topic is. Let's go there next. So you use it to help you drive the lessons from one to the other. Now, one way to show the learning on the driving question board is to take that sticky note off, put it on a little piece of paper or a large sticky note. And you can see that this one has labeled which table answered the sticky notes. And they put their evidence of learning and demonstrate their learning right next to the question. And so this is one way to provide the figuring out side of the driving question board and display it publicly. Here's an example of a driving question board that looks finished. All of the sticky notes are off. We all have explanations, and it's really a time to celebrate. Look what we figured out. So this is one way to display it. Another way, this is mid-unit. So you can see that the questions that were taken off the board are up at the top half of that bulletin board, and with the explanations. This is what we figured out. Looks like there's two separate rooms here, so two different classes are figuring out the same phenomenon. And you can use the same driving question board for multiple classes. But now there's more room on the driving question board because you want to give students opportunities to ask more questions in the middle of a unit. So you're going to want to take some questions off to make space for more questions. Now, notice there's also some evidence of learning that's provided with that figuring out upper portion of the driving question board. We've got some models that they used. There are some pictures. And so that really helps to demonstrate and publicly display what we have figured out. Here's an example of a beautiful driving question board that looks all finished. It has all the evidence of learning. It has models. It has questions that were answered. This is wonderful, a wonderful display to keep up all year to really celebrate our learning along the school year or for open house, or it's just what a beautiful display of a driving question board. However, if you don't have room for driving question boards, and if you have multiple periods in a day, sometimes we just use butcher paper and we put that butcher paper on a hanger like you would hang pants on with two clips. And then some people purchase those garment hanger racks that's on wheels and you can move around the room. And so all the posters that you might create for period one are on hangers, and you pull them off and you put them up in front of the class when you need them, and you put them back on the garment rack when you're done. So I've seen some people do that. They do not have to look this pretty. This is just Gretchen Brinsa's beautiful work. And so I wanted to share it. But I'll show you my version I use with my Cal State Fullerton pre-service teacher candidates. We're learning how to write curriculum and how to design curriculum for the NGSS and write lesson plans. And so when we first start off, we ask all these questions, we create the categories, and then we use check marks when the students feel like we've reached an understanding to that question. You can use, this is being used on Jamboard. There are multiple pages. You can get up to 20, I think, different slides or frames on Jamboard. So you can actually put evidence of learning about phenomenon on the next slide and evidence of learning about student discourse on the next slide. So that's one way to use Jamboard for a driving question board. Not as pretty, I know it, but a digital option. Okay, so now I want to introduce Gretchen Brinsa. She is an NGSS instructional leader out there. Thank you, Gretchen, if you ever watch this, for your leadership and all of your knowledge you share. If you're not following Gretchen yet, you need to follow her on Twitter, because every picture I got comes from her Twitter feed. And she is so great at sharing what she does in her classroom, and she's amazing. So thank you, Gretchen. Give her a follow, and everybody, good luck with your driving question board. Doesn't matter if it doesn't look beautiful. We just want to make those questions public, and we want to use those questions to drive the learning. All right, good luck, everybody.